What do you get when a doctor who's led over 100 clinical trials steps away from the bedside to create drugs that no one thought possible, like the world's first sublingual ketamine wafer for pain relief, or a freeze-dried cannabis wafer? Well, visionary or risky, and is sublingual NAD the future of longevity or just hype? Today on the Cracking Backs podcast, we sit down with Dr. Janakan Krishnarajah to uncover bold ideas that are disrupting medicine and why the next decade of healthcare may look nothing like you'd expect. Welcome, Dr. Janakan Krishnarajah. Boy, that was a tongueful right there. Thank you. You are a physician turned biotech leader. I think that is the coolest thing. We met you at one of the A4M conferences, and I was immediately fascinated by not only your character, but your intelligence. And we looked into your background, and as a chief operating officer and chief medical officer of IX Biopharma, you've overseen some groundbreaking developments that we want to talk about regarding not so much the drug delivery, but all the healthcare aspects that are really becoming forefront right now. And I think you'll have a lot to offer. And you are broadcasting all the way from Singapore, which is extremely cool. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me both. It's great to be here.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. So you've been on the front and center of more than 100 clinical trials, which is fascinating because for those who don't understand that, the medical equivalent to that would be like a 100 high stake, maybe military missions or something like that. But what originally pulled you away from treating patients at the bedside and into the world of drug development? And was there a defining, challenge or project early on that really shaped your journey?
Right. Great question. I've never had it put that way in terms of that analogy. So I don't quite think of it as grueling as what you mentioned. But, look, it's an exciting field nonetheless. How did I get involved? Well, as you mentioned, a physician by training, and then I went into subspecialize into internal medicine and clinical pharmacology, and the latter being the study of drugs and how it interacts with the body, how they interact with each other. And part of that also, I found an intellectual interest in how do we actually develop drugs and how do we trial them to ensure that not only are they safe, but they work. And so with that interest, I got involved in very, very early stages of a clinical trials facility that was being set up in Australia, which is where I trained and practiced clinical medicine. And so we set that up, and we were essentially running early phase clinical drug trials, and that is the first time in particular focusing on what we call first in human trials. So the first time a new drug, that's a new chemical entity, makes that big jump from, being tested in animals and being shown to be safe and potentially effective to going into humans. It's a big jump, right? Because there's a huge translational gap. You don't exactly know. So you've got to take great precautions. And, the first person that gets dosed is the first person anywhere in the world. And that's the kind of work we were doing for pharma and biotech companies, most of whom actually were from the United States, where, obviously there's plenty of innovation and great companies. And so that's how I got involved. And with that interest, I was the investigator, so the medical investigator for a number of those studies, as you mentioned. And so that's how I was doing that whilst practicing clinical medicine. And it's obviously very similar, but had its own challenges.
Oh, that's fantastic. So, in your work, you turned this unconventional idea into reality. For example, like developing Wafermine. That being the world's first sublingual ketamine wafer for pain relief. I'm actually quite surprised at how many patients have tried ketamine to help with their mental emotional conditions. And it's being one of the world's first sublingual wafer for pain relief. That's a pretty bold move because and by the way, so many of our listeners may be associating ketamine with more than anesthesia or even more than a nightclub use, but this is more than an everyday medicine. So, what inspired you to move on that subject as we progress through some of the other things you've done?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, it was the product that interested me to then sort of make that move from being a clinician, seeing patients and running clinical trials, but on the investigator side, not on the drug development side. The short story is I came across IX Biopharma as an investigator running their clinical studies, and got to understand the technology of sublingual delivery, which is the basis of which the product you mentioned, Wafermine, which is a sublingual ketamine, was founded around. And I saw the great, I saw the technology work because we saw the data and we saw that that this can deliver various drugs very effectively across the membrane underneath the tongue. And there's a whole reason why we would even look at that as a route of administration, which if you want to get into, we can talk about later. But essentially, when I was approached to come and join the company, it was again taking that new challenge to go, okay, instead of running a clinical study and then handing it back to the company who would then go on and further develop it, this was quite an exciting challenge to go, okay, now I can actually take a program and run it through and try and see that towards the end and see that then get, in the hands of patients or clinicians and then patients ultimately, which is very satisfying. And one of the products that was just being started to be looked at was ketamine within using the wafer technology. And so I had experience with ketamine. We were, it's an interesting story where I was actually the first year I started practicing in the hospitals. It was back in 2002. And I'm not sure if you recall, or this was, I suspect it made headlines over in your neck of the woods, but there was this horrific terrorist bombing in Bali in 2002. I don't know if you remember that.
Yes.
And yeah, and it was at a night. So Bali's about just over a 3-hour flight from Western Australia, Perth, the capital of Western Australia. So it's actually, Perth is where I train, is the most isolated capital city in the world. So 3-hour flight is actually really close, just to put it into context. It takes 4 hours. It's like going sort of East Coast, West Coast in the United States. To get to any major city, it's a 4-hour flight within the country. To get to the next capital city, 3-4 hours. So Bali was a very common holiday destination for people where I lived. And needless to say, I'd been to that same club, but a year before, where the bombing went off. But needless to say, it was a horrific event. Significant, scores of people were burned, and they needed to airlift all these people to get treatment. And in Indonesia, which is where Bali is, there was limited capabilities to do that. So the vast majority, and there were a lot of foreigners, right? Because this was in a tourist part of the town, of the island. And they airlifted scores of these patients to Australia to be treated. And I was in one of the major hospitals in Western Australia. And, we needed to treat these patients. And ketamine had been used very effectively to treat and manage patients with burns for their dressing changes. So procedural pain. Can you imagine second-degree burn? You're wrapped up. You've got to do dressing changes daily, maybe twice daily. How painful that is just to try and remove that bandaging every time. It's probably worse than the initial insult, right? And so they would give ketamine, dissociative anesthetic, dissociative analgesic, to help do that. But what happened was, the hospital wasn't equipped. This is about a 600-bed hospital. It wasn't equipped, though, to deal with all of these patients and have these patient-controlled analgesic pumps, these IV pumps to administer ketamine. So the patient will go, okay, I'm going to administer the ketamine just before. They tell the patient, just press this, and then do the procedure, the dressing change. And so, we had a head of pain medicine who just joined, who's a professor, who's actually an advisor in our company, Professor Stefan Schug, and he was very experienced in ketamine. And he said, look, we don't have enough pumps. Let's mix it in some orange juice because it's quite bitter, and we'll give it to them in their mouth orally under the tongue. And that was sort of how sublingual ketamine, at least in that part and they've got great experience now. Probably some of the best. I would say probably the leaders in the world, because it's now been 20 plus years of using this approach. And so these patients were getting ketamine mixed in orange juice, administered orally under the tongue, and then dressing changes were being done, and it was quite remarkable. And then went on to the hospital, tried to, compound that in the pharmacy department, but it was a great opportunity of a combination of the sublingual delivery technology from Biopharma, which was homegrown Australian actually technology, even though we're a Singapore listed company, and combine that with actually ketamine to deliver it. And so that was how that was born. And I was very excited by that. And so, that was part of the reason why I joined the company to help develop that product.
Brilliant. And thank you for sharing that story. We all love stories, right, Terry?
Hey, perfect. Can I ask a question? Doc, I'm going to ask a street question, because I've always wanted to talk to somebody who understands ketamine from your point of view, and because my son had broke his arm, they used ketamine to put him under to set the arm, and so I think it's a fantastic drug. However, especially since the last couple of years, the distrust for like big pharma has, I think, overtaken the use of pharma, right? And we're starting to hear ketamine now as a party drug, especially, slip it under your tongue and feel high and feel great. And we're starting to see people associate ketamine with PTSD, with a form of LSD, and just tripping out and having this fun and having ketamine parties. How does somebody from the scientific side and the research side combat that when you hear that? I mean, I'm sure it makes you sad. I'm sure you can go, well, everybody's going to misuse everything. But what's your, from a scientific side, a way of combating that?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I mean, it's Special K, right? Is the sort of one of the nicknames for it. And in Australia, I mean, in other places, Special K is a cereal, breakfast cereal. But in some parts of the world, it's not. So. Look, but to be honest, to be frank, it's actually, that's been something that's been existing for a long time. So when we started to look at this, about 8 to 10 years ago, these were the challenges we're having. I think now it's much more acceptable by physicians, by medical practice, by those in governance, by the regulators than it was. Back say 80s, 90s. It still obviously has that abuse potential. People do abuse it, but usually in significantly higher doses than what we are using for analgesia in this instance. We're using what we call sub-anesthetic dose, very low dose ketamine, but it's still very effective analgesic. So, I think people are much more educated about it. There's obviously been this renaissance of psychedelic drugs in recent years, and it's an undulating course. But these were all developed back in the 60s, 70s, and in history is history. They sort of were shelved, but have come back to I guess mainstream medicine. Ketamine is probably the cleanest, if you would like, or the one that's most accepted, because it's got this 50-year history of continual use, and there's a lot of data in the literature. Our physicians using ketamine off-label to treat a variety of indications, including psychiatric indications you mentioned, PTSD, depression, as we know. And then a few years ago in 2019, Janssen under J&J, Johnson & Johnson, took one form of ketamine, which we call S-ketamine, and got that and put it in an intranasal delivery and went through the approval process. And that's approved, as you may be aware, as Spravato for depression. And I think that helped legitimize as well ketamine, and so to understand the benefits of it, and so I think we're in a much better place in terms of understanding what ketamine can do, and also the safety aspects and the limited abuse potential and the consequences. If you think about it, we've just come through and still going through an incredible opioid epidemic, and I'm sure you're very well aware of the impact that's had on. It was a point in time where lifespan was decreasing, and it was attributable to in the generation, and partly attributable to for opioid, the epidemic and deaths from opioids, 60,000 a year. plus, and it was crazy. And so having a non-opioid analgesic, which doesn't cause respiratory depression, in sub-anesthetic doses, was something that people said, hey, look, this is really interesting. So yeah, it's not without some challenges, but certainly I think we're in a much better place to understand and how to use it than we were some years ago.
So for the listening audience, you're saying ketamine is not addictive?
Oh my God, I was going to ask that. That's exactly what I was going to ask.
Look, I think it's what's been shown is that the abuse potential is limited, and the consequences of any abuse is, I guess, compared to opioids, is minimal. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have some abuse potential in the susceptible individuals. So I think you have to judiciously select your patients and monitor them. But we've been, even though the product is still undergoing clinical studies and trials, we've been through an exemption in Australia, been supplying this to hospitals for the last 10 years, and over 1 million doses have been supplied to over 100 hospitals now, where pain specialists and now more recently psychiatrists are prescribing this to the patients, not only in the hospital setting, but they're taking this product home and they're having it at home. And there haven't been any reports of diversion or abuse over those years. And so, I think if managed correctly in the right way, it's certainly less harmful than getting a prescription for potentially an opioid that, happens every single minute of every single day.
Thanks for answering that. I really appreciate that. And Spence, you can go back to your special K breakfast and you're all good.
Yeah, you actually mentioned something about transitioning doctors to use this type of ketamine. Did you say the company pays the doctor to prescribe, or did?
Sorry, no. So it's just that there is an avenue in the Therapeutics Good regulations in Australia where a doctor can prescribe. It's like off-label prescribing, essentially, but where a hospital can order a unapproved medicine, provided that there's no approved product and it's made under highest pharmaceutical grade, what we call CGMP. So we have that. License, the equivalent of the FDA in Australia, licensed manufacturing facility there, and so everything is made to that highest quality, and it's made at the request of the prescribing physician. So no, they do it off their own behest. We can't advertise, we can't market, we can't even talk to them about it. It's really up to them to knock on the door and say, hey, we heard about this. And through word of mouth from doctor to doctor, over the last few years, now there's over 100 hospitals who are ordering the product to treat their patients because there are limited alternatives in some of the cases.
This is interesting because both Dr. Terry and I specialize in sports injuries, and I'm at a time now after all these years of practicing that a lot of retired football players are coming in to get care, and I used to treat them when they were at their prime. Now they're miserable. In fact, just yesterday I was treating somebody, 13 surgeries, and he's in his early or maybe late 30s or early 40s, one of the two. 13 surgeries. Love the guy, and I used to treat him when big as a house. Anyway, point is,
by the way, doctor, he's only 5'4", so everybody's big.
Yeah. Oh, he met me.
We met. The doctor
is probably about 6.
Yeah, that's just the physical height. Your presence was much greater than that, so I didn't notice that.
But this guy, like many others, are still doing oxycodone.
Right.
Oh wow.
And they're not addicted. I go, yeah, but it can't be that good. I'm not that I am big on medication, but even transitioning to ketamine would be a step up for them. Wouldn't you think? To get them off of it.
Yeah, it's one of the alternatives, and it's opioid sparing. If you take it with opioids, you can use less opioids. It could be part of a combination. It could be part of a replacement, substitution. And again, it's just choosing. It's just part of the armamentarium. It certainly has its place. but again, you don't want to create something new with something else. It's certainly much safer, but you've got to, again, judicious use of medicines. I completely agree with you. You choose the right patient, it can do amazing things. We've seen experience where patients have been, they've got terrible chronic neuropathic pain. I'm sure you've come across a lot of patients with this in your practice. Yeah. And what do you do with some of these patients? Because, you can give them the approved medications, and the numbers needed to treat for some of these multi-billion-dollar drugs, mind you, 1 in 5, 1 in 6, 1 in 7. You need to treat 7 just to get one response. And they come with, a whole host of side effects, and some people just can't tolerate them. And then, you go through the ladder and they just come out the other end, and, sometimes they're worse off. And the last thing they wanted to do is go and see somebody else again. And in some of these patients, taking a low dose of ketamine, because of the way ketamine works through blocking, the NMDA receptor, which really is sort of how the nerves communicate with each other, and how the nervous system takes sensory inputs from the outside world, it actually can sort of mitigate that chronification of pain. So particularly if you can treat them early enough, you can maybe prevent some of that, what we call wind-up phenomenon, that chronification occurring. It can be life-changing for some patients. So we've seen some amazing results.
As much as Dr. Terry and I are, we've been practicing a non-drugless approach for so many years, but it's always interesting to hear about the other side, right, and alternatives, because we don't typically get pharmaceutical education, but hearing what you have to say as alternatives to some of the things that some of our patients are doing, that is much more critical. I actually been practicing, this year's been 40 years, and I've had 2 classmates die from oxycodone during that time. Okay. Yeah. And I never realized it until that. And one was this beautiful girl, and she would ask me she would come in, get treated, and she got caught up in this was maybe 20 years ago. And she would tell me how, hey, are you able to write a prescription? It got to that point, and I go, no, why? And she mentioned oxycodone. But back then, nobody really knew what it could do. So anyway, those are the nightmares that I still harbor, thinking, man, if I knew more, I could have helped, But anyway, moving on to other bold ideas, something that's even much more progressive, and that is the IX Biopharma created this Xativa, that freeze-dried cannabis wafer that, for medicinal use. Now, it's so interesting because even still in Florida, the state of Florida has not passed, any kind of laws to, be using it for recreationally. Although, California, right? California.
Oh, yeah. Of course, California.
Right, of course.
Come on.
So
come on, we're surfers, free love, all that stuff.
Hey, peace, man. Yeah. So my question is, pushing a product like that into mainstream and all. So I'm sure, even back then it would have raised some eyebrows, even now. But man, what a happier alternative to, having like a cannabis wafer than, smoking a joint or weed or something like that. Tell me about some of the pushback or skepticism you had, working on a product like that.
Yeah. We're fairly limited. We're really taking a pharmaceutical approach, and the product is available under prescription in Australia. So it's some of the states, of course, medicinal cannabis only, the recreational ones you mentioned. So it's similarly, it's only under a doctor's prescription. So the idea was that, again, the technology is very good at improving the absorption of molecules, or in this case, drugs that are poorly absorbed when you swallow them, because in some cases they just get broken down by the harsh environment of the stomach, or even if they do get absorbed from the gut, the liver then does its detoxification, and by the time it gets into the bloodstream, you have not much left. In the case of cannabinoids like CBD, which is what's the active in Xativa, or even THC, which is the active in another product we call Hypera, you're looking at sort of 6% absorbed or potentially even less of what you take, right? So there are a number of these drugs which are poorly orally bioavailable, we call it. And in some cases, you need to inject them. Like, so even ketamine, it's around 10% if you swallow it. And there are a whole heap of other drugs that are very poorly absorbed. And so the whole idea of the technology was, let's apply that to try and improve the absorption profile, make it less variable, more consistent dosing, more predictable dosing. And so it's been actually really well received by the prescribers, by the physicians who are who already, they've decided that they are willing to look at cannabis and cannabinoids as a viable treatment option for their patients. And then they say, well, this is like a pharmaceutical formulation in the sense that we know exactly what the dose is. You don't have to guess. It's not inhalation. We're getting variable dosing. It's fixed dose. It's made to the highest pharmaceutical grade. Faster onset of action, because what's happening with sublingual absorption is that underneath the tongue, there's a thin membrane. And under the thin membrane, there's a whole rich network of blood vessels. And so the aim is, if you can get whatever it is you're trying to get through underneath the tongue, through the membrane, into those little blood vessels, they drain directly into the neck veins and go straight into the heart and then get pumped around the body. It bypasses the gut and it bypasses the liver. Something called first pass metabolism. So when you swallow something, the first pass effect is that through the stomach and the liver, it takes out, in these cases, 94% of the drug before it even gets into the blood circulation. So if you can bypass that through sublingual, that's why. If you have a technology that can do that, and it took many, many, many years, because it's not as easy as just putting something under the tongue. But it took many, many years to develop a technology that can do that effectively for a wide range of different compounds.
I am absolutely fascinated. You read my mind. That's exactly the question I was going to ask. You answered it beautifully. The effects of sublingual versus digestion, regular swallowing and digestion, or injection, or what have. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. That was perfect.
Hey, Doc, from a scientific point of view, when you talk about sublingual, how does a wafer differ from a sublingual tincture drop versus a sublingual gummy?
Yeah, okay. Well, I haven't heard of a sublingual gummy, but I guess you can put anything under your tongue.
Right.
Yeah,
you can chew it up and then put it on your tongue.
Sorry?
You can chew it up and then just...
You chew it up, yeah, okay, absolutely.
And then
just let it sit there, yeah. So, absolutely. Sublingual just means under lingual tongue. So if you put anything under your tongue, it's called sublingual. The issue is you need to do two things. You need to be able to disintegrate the dosage form, whether it's a gummy, a film, a tablet, or in this case, what we call a wafer. And that's, to be honest, that's not, there are a lot of different technologies that can do that. But you have to disintegrate it pretty quickly. The second thing, and the harder thing to do, is you have to actually release the active molecule, whatever it is, in this case CBD, or whether it be ketamine, or whether it be NAD or glutathione, or some of the other products we have. You need to be able to have that molecule released from the actual matrix that's a part of the formulation that you're using. And that's much more trickier. And so what we did is we came up with it's a patented technology, a special formulation of sugars and starches, but combined with a proprietary freeze-drying process. So we lyophilize it. We freeze-dry the product, and you end up with this wafer that's highly porous. It's what we call amorphous, which means non-crystalline, and non-ionic. And those three features are critical. So why we got the patent, why we got, the technology stands out, is those three features allow the wafer to disintegrate rapidly, but also release the molecule from the actual wafer, the housing, the scaffolding matrix, so that it can get absorbed effectively across the membrane. Because remember, you've got a very small window of opportunity before the patient or the consumer goes and swallows. Right. And once they do that, you might as well just have swallowed it in the first place. So what differentiates, the wafer technology, Waferix, and our related technology, Waferlogics, which is now, we've gone into more complex molecules like biologics, even GLP-1 drugs, which is actually a really interesting new product that we're developing. But that all, that differentiates the effectiveness of sublingual delivery. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to move the needle from oral ingestion towards sublingual. And to be completely open, you're not going to get 100% sublingual because some of it's going to get swallowed. So for the example of drops or tinctures, the issue in a liquid form for most people is that they end up swallowing a lot of it before it actually gets absorbed across the membrane. And that's the case for a lot of technologies, or some of the other products that are put under the tongue. They look like they're disintegrated and dissolved, but they're still at a molecular level. You've still got whatever the matrix was of that formulation encapsulating the active drug, and it just doesn't get through the membrane. It gets swallowed, and then whatever happens, happens.
So you're finding like the tinctures, people aren't really dropping them under the tongue and leaving it there. They're just putting their mouth thinking.
No, they will. I think a lot of people do put it under the tongue, but then it's about, okay, how can that actually how quickly can that get absorbed? We would put in things into the matrix that would help with the adhesion to the mucus layer as well, to improve the contact time and improve the flux across the membrane. So there are things that, you want to try and, again, shift the needle in your favor, whatever you can do to get that improved. So ketamine, we can improve it by, threefold over oral. Then you can take another drug like, say, buprenorphine, which is an opioid drug, and improve that by, 3 or 4-fold. In some cases, we've improved it 5-fold, so or even more. So that's, you just want to do what you can to improve that absorption profile and predictability, and it's certainly not as simple as just putting it under your tongue.
Doing nobody's done before. I mean, I think Dr. Spencer and I love that push. Your mantra, you only have one life, pursue it with the whole heart and live with no regrets, reminds me of even Walt Disney. He says, we won't come to work, we will come and play. And because he goes, when people are happy and playing, pursuing happiness, they get more stuff done. How does that mantra and that philosophy show up in the way you lead your people?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we are doing, we've always got to keep in front of mind what is the outcome. It's very easy to get lost in the day-to-day and the tasks, right? Because that's ultimately what gets us to that end point. But I think just refocusing on what is the outcome. And so, one of the things that we have done in the past is we try to do more of, and I guess we probably can do even more of it, but it's just to try and close that loop. And actually, if there are examples of patients who have actually taken the product, and especially in the context where even whilst we're developing it, if it can be supplied under off-label or a special access scheme, and we can get that feedback from those patients, we can see the impact on the patients and on the patients' lives, or the consumers' lives in the case of nutraceutical and wellness products, and feeding that back, that just really highlights exactly what the mission that we're on. I think it's easy sometimes to get lost in, as I mentioned, the tasks and the day-to-day, but keep bringing it back to making that, because all of us have had either a personal experience within ourselves or a family member or a very close friend who, has had some benefit from something that somebody else developed many years ago and went through those challenges. So, I think that's really important for us, just to keep bringing that back to why are we doing this. And, I think that helps keep everyone motivated and push through when it gets a little bit more challenging.
You often have, after speaking on, obstacles to overcome, and, the industry that you're in has changed over the years, and maybe even now with new government and so on, it's probably changing even more so. Good or bad, that's not the point. It's just change and dealing with that change. So, in that healthcare and biotech industry, when compared to when you first started to now, I want to know what's ahead. And you had mentioned something about the GLP-1, which is, for those listeners who don't know what that is, that's the Ozempic and Moderna. That's the weight loss medication that even that in the last year has
exploded.
Taken on. It's exploded, but even taking on microdosing versus macro dosing. So and actually, if I could throw one more example in there, the just the cannabis market and how, in 2018 it was projected to do like this $13.8 billion, or it was doing that, and then projected to be 66 billion by 2025. But to remark on one of the biggest challenges there is, getting it in a store, in a prescription or for medicinal use or what have you, became more costly to some of the consumers. So it hurt the market, because people were turning back to their street drug pushers on the side and getting it cheaper to smoke or what have you. So that was unexpected. What kind of things do you find in this industry you're in today, and especially with the GLP-1? You see any big changes coming up?
Yeah, I mean, it's ever evolving. I think look, it's hard to go by what's happening with the GLP-1 story. It's pretty remarkable in its own right. And I think it's really taken the industry by storm, in the sense that, if there are really there's only two companies in the world that actually market these products. And everyone else wants to try and find something that can do something similar or better. And so there's a huge race. And, I think, to try and do that, our approach is different. We are really looking at trying to optimize the delivery. That's what we do. We're not looking to develop a new chemical. We're trying to say, okay, well, you've got something that's really good, but can we actually deliver it better? So it's a slightly different approach. But yeah, the GLP-1 story is remarkable in its own right. It started off, as a treatment, and it still is a significant treatment for type 2 diabetes. And then more recently, it became obviously very popularized for its ability for people to lose weight with it. And that's probably what's really spurred its significant growth. And, it's gone mainstream, right? You hear it everywhere in popular culture as well, references. But it's not stopping there. There's data that's come out more recently about its ability to improve long-term cardiac outcomes, renal kidney outcomes. And there's data now emerging, and we'll see. That's, where I think it's expected in the next 12 months, 6 to 12 months, where there's some large late-stage clinical studies looking at its ability to perhaps improve cognitive function in patients with Alzheimer's disease, for example. So it's like, what can this thing not do? I mean, it's a bit baffling when you've been in an industry where you're really looking at very targeted approaches to different conditions, and then you've got this analog, a variant of a natural, peptide hormone that's in the body that can have all of these benefits. So yeah, it's really exciting to see where this goes and how far this kind of approach, therapeutic approach, can help. But we've also got to be fairly pragmatic and understand that, I don't believe there's a magic bullet for everything. And I think, we've got to, I think it's great that it's got all these benefits, but we've got to just keep an eye on exactly how are we going about it, and not get too carried away with one particular approach, because I think the secret to good health and long life, if that's what you're chasing, is not a singular one.
Here's just an opinion. Doesn't necessarily. It's a rhetorical question, and it doesn't necessarily need a answer. But as you were talking about that, I was realizing that like the big food companies with all their highly processed foods are being economically injured by the better food choices that people are making, and they're out there trying to figure out how to make food that attracts the ones that are denying it. But that's a whole nother story. The point being is, I think that audience might want to be curious. Is it the drug that's providing all these health benefits, or is it the drug that's allowing you to make better food choices? Because I read an article, a piece, and I think it was Wall Street Journal they had one of the food company marketing agents had been paid to go around and watch the people go shopping that were on the GLP-1s, and they found that they had no interest in going into the aisles. They went around the perimeter of the grocery store, as you know, is the better, more fresh foods. And at the end, they went up and asked the person that they were following. I mean, this was all obviously above board and communicated. Why didn't you go into the aisle with the Oreos and the all the snacks and things? They go, we just don't have an interest in that anymore. I mean, food, the produce tastes like food. The tomato tastes like a tomato, and it's tantalizing enough that I don't need to go into the center of the grocery store. So my point is, for those, you just might want to question. It's not the drug the drug is helping you, but the food choices are the miracle. Because they always say food is medicine. So anyway, just a thought. I mean, if you want to comment on that,
yeah. I mean, look, I think I haven't heard of that. What you mentioned, that's really fascinating. That sort of study. Look, I think it's both. I think if because a lot of these studies, I mean, all of these studies are controlled studies. So patients are, they're placebo controlled. They're managed and matched for dietary intake and habits as best as you can through a randomization process. So, and if you increase the numbers of the study, randomization usually happens. So people with certain habits end up getting split equally across the groups. And generally speaking, for the most part, particularly if you can reproduce the results over multiple studies, then you're pretty confident that the result is the result and it's not by chance. So I think it's definitely clear that irrespective of people's habits, dietary and lifestyle, because that the drug does have the improvement. But as you would also know, just being part of a clinical study will change your behavior as well. So that placebo effect is multifold, right? Because you're actually changing, I guess, it's a psychological change, impact, different approach. But the fact that you're even enrolled in that, you even put yourself up for that, is a selection bias of sorts. And then, once you're involved in it and you think you might be on active drug, for example, then you'll behave perhaps in a slightly different way. So there's always that effect. But, whenever these studies are looked at, they're compared to the effect of placebo. So we see weight reduction, improvements in glucose control in the placebo arm. What you have to demonstrate is that you're significantly better, statistically significantly better than even whatever improvements they had. So we use that as so instead of the baseline being 0, we say, no, the baseline is now whatever the placebo response was, and you have to beat that in a statistically significant manner. And so these are these are obviously how trials are designed, and they're robust. But I think if you take the patient off the study and then they continue on, or they were never in the study and they were just getting prescribed the drug, then absolutely I agree that, the way I look at it is particularly those with obesity who have struggled, they've tried all the different things that have come by, and whether they can tolerate it or not, maybe they've come off it or they've reverted. I think this just gives you a real big helping hand to lose the weight and then make the changes that you need to make. Because we know if you come off the drug within a year, you're going to put back the weight, if you're looking at it from an obesity perspective. And not only just that, but we know that if you lose weight rapidly, you lose a lot of lean muscle mass. And I'm sure you're very familiar with that. So if you lose 30% lean muscle mass and then you come off the drug and 12 months later you've put back all your weight, the risk is you haven't put back the 30% of lean muscle mass. So you're actually, in my view, if that's the situation you find yourself in, you're worse off potentially than if you didn't go on it. So it takes a lot of discipline, but for those who are motivated and they just needed that that helping hand to just start to see things come down, to help read that positive reinforcement cycle, that now then they can make those healthy choices in terms of diet and lifestyle and behavior and exercise and everything else that we know is the only long-term way to do it. Because otherwise you're going to be stuck on this drug for the rest of your life, and I don't think that's how we were designed to be.
Super brilliant. You're also part of something that Spencer and I are very near and dear to our hearts, and that's the word longevity. And that's like a new, well, it's a buzzword that's just gaining momentum, and you're kind of part of this exclusive longevity docs community, right? So what if you had to look into a crystal ball? We look at longevity from the inside out, working on the neurology and the fascia and all that. What's your crystal ball looking at with this fast growing term longevity medicine? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's definitely gathering momentum. I think there's a lot of publicity, a lot of resources now being channeled, which is great. I think when you come down to the foundational principles of longevity and health span and living a quality life for longer, it comes back down largely to all the boring things that we know we should be doing, right? And so I think, that as a foundation, of course, that's where we need to start. And I think that's important. But of course, there are these really interesting technological advances and pushes that are having some really interesting initial results. It's still very early, so it's very hard to know exactly where we will end up. But there are certainly significant advances if you're looking at even in the therapeutic space, which obviously I'm more familiar with repurposing existing medications that have now found that, at least in animal models, that you could get longevity benefits. And obviously people have been using these products, and now they're transitioning to looking at trying to trial these, and so the data is still quite nascent, but we will start to see some readouts coming out in the next 12 months and beyond. It's going to be really interesting to see. Obviously, the approaches around stem cells, gene therapy, I mean, these are more complicated approaches that have potentially far-reaching benefits and consequences, but again, very early, I think it's fair to say, in the evolution of these technologies. I think everyone's going to keep pushing the boundaries. At the moment, it's still quite on the fringe of conventional practice. If you're looking at some of these more, these more newer technologies, but yeah, I think it's going to gather at a rate of knots. So there's certainly a lot of high-profile, billionaires who are out there, and the biohacking community who's really pushing things forward. And to be honest, they're really bringing a lot of insights that would otherwise take a lot longer in the scientific, to run clinical studies to do. I mean, you can get some insights from some of the things these guys are doing that perhaps, we wouldn't get past an ethics committee yet at this point in time. So it's interesting to see exactly where it all goes.
So to use a term that Dr. Spencer loved, what when you're looking at this research, what jazzes you about some of the research that you're seeing that's coming out that makes you even get out of bed and get excited about some of this research from that we just mentioned, the biotech industry? And what do you see your IX Biopharma, what role do you see playing in that? But what's some of the research you just kind of glossed over? What's some of this research that is jazzing you?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. Looking at modulating some of the nutrient sensing pathways in the body and how we can manipulate that. So all drugs, obviously, there's a lot of buzz around drugs like rapamycin, drugs for diabetes, which is an immunosuppressant, or drugs that we know has been used for diabetes, like metformin, other drugs that are used for like erectile dysfunction, like Viagra, sildenafil. And its benefits in cardiovascular health, but potentially cognition and even cellular health, longevity, melatonin even. And then what we're looking at, which is more on the sort of, nutraceutical side, at IX and Entity Health, which is the health span company that's a subsidiary that's really developing and commercializing these products. Is like NAD and glutathione. These are molecules that I'm particularly excited about because they're molecules that your body produces. NAD is, it's kind of gained a lot of interest in the last few years, and people are infusing it into their veins, and they're taking it in different forms, how they can. but it's a fascinating molecule. Likewise is glutathione. These are made by, pretty much every cell in your body, and they have far-reaching effects to maintain cellular health and homeostasis, that balance. But what ends up happening is that, as we age, the levels of these critical molecules decline for a whole range of factors, that we may not have time to go into today. But, if you look at NAD, by the time we're in our 50s, we've probably got half the level of NAD that we had when we were in our 20s. And if we just talk about NAD to start with, what is it? Well, it's a molecule, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, that's involved in 500 plus chemical reactions, redox reactions, the transfers of electrons between one molecule and the other, transferring energy from one to the other. If you remember, high school chemistry, which I remember very little of. But that's a central critical molecule. But now, more recently, we've realized that, and that's how I remember it in second year biochemistry in med school. Didn't pay much attention. It was involved in energy metabolism. So it powers your mitochondria, the powerhouses of your cell, to help convert food into energy. And you need NAD for it. So now if you're running at half power of NAD, well, what does that say to the efficiency of your engine? Obviously, it's going to be affected, right? We know more recently, and this is where it's gained even more steam and momentum, that they power certain proteins and enzymes, some of them called sirtuins. Sirtuins are also known as the longevity genes. There are 7 of them in the human body. And NAD, particularly for longevity, probably, SIRT1, SIRT3, SIRT6 are really important for maintaining cellular health, regulating genome stability, cellular, DNA repair, and mitochondrial health. And these are so critical in it. And you know what? They're powered by NAD. So if you don't have optimal levels of NAD available, then these sirtuin proteins don't work as effectively, the guardians of our genomes, the guardians of our cellular health. We also know that the enzymes and the proteins that really are busily working around the clock to fix our breaks in our DNA, damage to our DNA, called PARPs, poly ADP ribose polymerases. These are powered by NAD. And, it's thought that maybe 10,000 or even 100,000 hits to our DNA each cell, every single day. So you have all of these PARP enzymes running around trying to fix all of these breaks in the DNA powered by NAD. So, something as simple and as critical as that, without looking to chemical drugs necessarily, can we actually just increase the amount of NAD in our body? And there are ways to do that naturally without even looking at any other outside of your lifestyle and your diet. You can improve your diet somewhat. You can exercise, that boosts NAD. You can restrict your calorie intake, caloric restriction, boosts sirtuin function, boosts NAD. You can sleep better, that improves NAD levels. There's obviously dietary sources. NAD is a derivative of vitamin B3. So you can take foods that are rich in sources there. But for most of us, doing all of those things can be challenging. And so in those situations, looking to try and supplement NAD makes a lot of sense. And so obviously we've looked at doing that. But, if you just swallow NAD, it's so unstable, it'll get broken down. You're not going to see much of it get into the bloodstream at all and get to the cells, importantly. And so hence we looked at using our wafer technologies to deliver NAD, which has been hugely successful. But, that's just an example. The glutathione, I love this molecule. I always knew it as an antioxidant and not much more for many, many years. But, in the last number of years, I've looked deeper and deeper into it. We've developed a sublingual glutathione product. It's a fascinating molecule. It's the master of antioxidants. So what does that mean? We throw around this word antioxidant, but I don't think anyone's ever explained what is it, and why is it a problem? And the reality is, just with everything, is nothing's a problem unless it's out of balance, right? So oxidation is good, reduction is good. Too much of either is bad. And so if you have too much of oxidation, think of it like a nail, piece of iron, exposed to water, moisture, oxygen. What happens? It rusts. It's an oxidative process. So too much oxidation in the body causes essentially a slow rusting process at the cellular level. And that's called oxidative stress. And that happens because we're exposed to environmental toxins, pollution, maybe self-inflicted, cigarette smoke, even alcohol, pharmaceutical drugs, poor food. You touched on that. I mean, that's probably a big thing, right? Processed food. We're creating all of this oxidative stress through creating free radicals and damage these molecules that end up going around, stealing electrons from other molecules. So from proteins, from DNA. That's what a free radical is. It's an unstable molecule that's lost electrons, and it goes up and goes, I'll take those, thanks. And then those proteins and DNA in your body are now unstable, and then they try to steal it from the next door guy. And it keeps going down and sets off these chain reactions. And so that's when oxidative stress becomes a problem. It leads to chronic inflammation, and chronic inflammation leads to chronic disease. And so something like glutathione, which is a master antioxidant, that level gets depleted over time because of all of these insults that it's just trying to keep everything going. And so, we look at ways to try and boost that. Again, simple things like we spoke about. You look at dietary sources of glutathione or cysteine, which is one of the amino acids that makes up glutathione, exercise, good sleep, all of those habits, relaxation, de-stressing if you can, will help boost your antioxidant levels, help boost your glutathione levels. But again, if you can't do that on your own, then supplementing makes sense. But again, if you swallow glutathione, less than 1% is going to get absorbed. It's a peptide. So what does your body do when it detects protein? It goes, just had some meat or whatever you're going to eat, or some legumes. I'm going to break that up into amino acids so I can use it as building blocks for my protein. Does the same thing with glutathione. So, again, taking a sublingual approach is a way that we've done to try and avoid that, so you can actually boost your glutathione levels. But, these are fascinating approaches. I think something as simple as focusing on these two molecules, as well as the other lifestyle interventions, I think can go a long way to improving cellular health. And if you improve cellular health, of course, you improve your overall health.
What a great explanation all the way around nutritionally, things that people could do right away. And, listen, I'm always very skeptical, or I need to feel a difference. And when you have me try that sublingual glutathione and the NAD, and it dissolved automatically, it tasted great. And while I'm talking to you and the other gentleman that was with you, I actually felt myself start speaking a little more fluidly, like I didn't have to think about what I was saying. I don't know if that, but I felt a difference. I even told you that.
Yeah.
And, it's...
I need to take this stuff so I can start speaking differently. So you'll yell at me for my punctuation. So there's got to be something in there.
I'm not sure it can help punctuation and grammar, but it certainly can help you with mental focus and clarity. I think we've seen that.
Well, that will at least help a little bit. So I can hopefully focus on my punctuation and grammar, because it's terrible.
You'll probably start speaking French all of a sudden too, man.
Look at that.
Bonus. No.
It's locked away in there somewhere.
Let me ask you, Dr. Janakan, we're at the end of the show, but we have a really fun part that I challenge you to be able to answer. I have 5 rapid fire questions for you. Okay. They'll require 1 or 10 word answers, right, and then we could wrap up the show. But we got to ask them of you. If you're ready, are you ready?
Yeah, well, pass fail, but anyway, be nice.
Exactly. All right, rapid fire question number 1. What is one morning habit that you swear by? Some people it's, exercise first thing. Some it's a cold plunge or a green smoothie or a 10-minute meditation. What's yours?
Well, I was taught this, and I practice it for the most part. And that's to make your bed every day, first thing in the morning. Make your bed.
Not to underestimate, but that is, I heard a general, like a very decorated military. Yeah. Did you hear that?
Yeah, he wrote the book called Make Your Bed.
Oh, really?
Make Your Bed. Yeah. So
I was always taught, complete what you finish. It builds the willpower, the muscle of willpower. And it's the little things that you do. Start a task, finish it. I've started so many and not finished it. But, willpower is like a muscle. And if you just do the little tasks, it can build over time. And so, that's a simple habit that starts the day off in the right way.
Hey, Doc, by any chance, are you married?
Yes.
So
I get
you'll
up
understand
last.
this. See, I get up whenever I make the bed. My wife comes back, rips it apart because I didn't make it right, and she has to remake it. So
You're
it's
in the
kind of,
military there, huh?
oh man,
Got
so
to get those
I read
hospital
the book.
corners, I mean, that's what we
Oh,
learn.
I read the book. I started making the bed. I listened to his lecture in Texas, and I started making bed. And she goes, "You didn't make it right." I'm like,
Well, I guess there's two parts to it, right? Do it and then do it right. Maybe we just start with the first one and work on the second later.
That's awesome. Question number 2. What is your maybe secret hobby or fantasy side gig or side hobby that maybe not many people know about? Like for me, nobody knows that I'm a photographer. Not many people know that photography is my passion. But how about yourself?
Oh, wow. I don't think I have many secrets. I'm not sure I have many talents. But what do I do that's a side hobby that no one knows about? I've just started after 30 years, I'm not sure if this is probably so suitable, but after 30 years, I've started to tinker on the piano again, which I gave up about 30 years ago. So I used to play to some extent to make some sort of, try and coordinated sound. But it's been actually really relaxing. It's been a nice way to de-stress from, to the annoyance of my family. I'm just picking up a song or two at a time, so I play them over and over again. But at the moment, that's something that I'm picking up again, if that counts. I don't think many people know about that.
That is fantastic, and that really emphasizes that we have two sides of the brain. One, you feed every day at work, very objective, very linear, and then there should be the art form that we provide, a satisfaction to, and that is music, or creating music, or learning music. That's perfect. All right, question number 3. Now, you pretty much answered this, but there's some people out there that still think that sublingual NAD for longevity is an overhyped intervention, or could it be a game changer?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's about, let's start with NAD first, right? Just very quickly. So I think, it's very encouraging if you understand how it works, that this is a really good approach to take to try and, boost levels to optimal. And we've seen so many examples of people who've been taking it. This is the thing. It's not, it's not a 2,000 patient clinical study yet, but who've seen so many improvements in their day-to-day life, whether that just be improved sleep patterns. They've just said, hey, you know what? I just sleep so much better. I've got much more energy, more mental clarity of focus. We're really starting to see a lot of that. We've got people who've been taking it, who started taking it, who've got Parkinson's disease, who are now showing improvements in motor function on top of their anti-Parkinsonian medication. In fact, there's some studies coming out in precursors we should hear about in the next 6 to 12 months, which going to be really interesting. These are really high quality. This is a really high quality study looking at NAD precursor in this case for Parkinson's. So let's see how that pans out. But we've seen people who've muscle recovery from post-workout, marathon runners. We've got a person here in Singapore who his father's a doctor. His son is a 15-year-old athlete who is trying to compete at a very high level at the age of 1,500 meters. Couldn't break 4 minutes 26. Started taking our sublingual NAD product, and then hit, I think it was 4:10, 4:12. Personal best, the best he's ever done. I mean, I don't know. There are lots of cases. So I think there's a lot of benefits in terms of what I've mentioned. Does it help longevity? The jury's completely out. I mean, we've seen data in animals, but it's not translated yet into humans. We'll see in time. And then can we do, from the sublingual point of view? Yeah, well, we've definitely shown in clinical studies you can improve levels by up to 70 76% after 6 weeks intracellular NAD levels by taking it. So we know it's doing some, it's doing the right thing. And more recently, we're about to publish. We haven't published yet, but we've done some work in animal models where we've shown that NAD delivered sublingually is getting in and increasing NAD levels in the red blood cells within minutes. So it's getting across the membrane, getting into the bloodstream, getting to the cell, getting in the cell. And now we're going more supported data that NAD itself, the molecule, which it sometimes has been disputed, can actually get directly into the cell. And so, it's a fascinating field. We certainly, I personally believe in it. Let's see how it goes. But certainly people are getting benefit from it at the moment. So we're encouraged by that.
Love it. So much for rapid fire questions.
Yeah, sorry about the takeaway answer.
But still, I didn't want to interrupt because I wanted to hear that. I love hearing that stuff. That's great, especially some of the data that's out there. Question number 4, we got 2 more, and that's tell me about a favorite place you've ever visited that makes you truly happy.
Oh, wow.
Aside from Florida.
Florida was great. We really enjoyed time in Florida. It's a place that makes you happy. There are so many. I think the place that probably comes to mind, and it's probably a recency effect, but I went recently to my ancestral homeland, which is the island of Sri Lanka. And I last was there in 1983, and I went there about a year and a half ago. So I can't say it's a place I've gone to continuously to make me happy, but going back there and seeing where I guess generations of my family had lived and to the land exactly where they had lived was something that I've never reconnected, and something I want to actually take the kids to. But it brought me a sense of solace and peace, and that I haven't felt anywhere else, despite traveling to wonderful places.
You know what, Dr. Terry, what's funny? He doesn't live that far from Bali, but people here talk about, oh, I want to go on vacation to Bali. That would be the greatest thing. That didn't even cross his mind. So,
I've been to Bali, but Sri Lanka, I can see that. Yeah,
I can imagine. Very good. 5th and last question. If you could give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would that be?
Yeah, I think really trust in, be still and trust in the inner voice, and follow that. Follow what brings you joy and brings others around you joy. And I think it'll help, make those decisions. I don't live in regret, but there are certainly things that I would have done differently. And I think if I just had more faith in following that inner, what really makes me tick, and not thinking that that's a selfish pursuit, because ultimately if you can, enrich your own life, you can enrich the lives of others around you. So that's what I would reinforce to my 20-year-old self.
Oh. Dr. Janakan Krishnarajah, what a great
rolled off the tongue
program today. Did that flow? Did I say that right?
Off the tongue.
I've been practicing for months. No, really, I appreciate your authenticity, your down-to-earth nature as a scientist, as a researcher, and extremely informative show from a side of health that Dr. Terry and I remain inquisitive about. So thank you. Thank you again for being on the show.
No, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you in person again soon.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Crackin' Backs podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Crackin' Backs Podcast. Catch new episodes every Monday. See you next time.